Hello, everyone, and welcome. Wherever you're joining us from, it's great to have you with us. We hope that you are well and safe. I'm Marilyn Zakhour, founder and CEO of Cosmic Centaurs. And for those of you who are new to us, we are a leadership and organizational development firm based in the GCC. Today's session is part of our 7th annual Cosmic Conference, which was a 3-week virtual series running from March 25th and ending tomorrow on April 17th. This year, we're exploring the theme Grounded and Limitless, leading organizations that survive and thrive. The intention behind this is to support leaders who are navigating extended periods of uncertainty and complexity. And when we say grounded and limitless, we're talking about the ability to stay anchored in reality as it is, while continuing to move forward and shape what could be. To unpack this, we brought together more than 20 voices, leaders, practitioners, academics, who are helping us explore what leadership really demands today through 3 lenses. Week 1 was about enduring, staying steady through the first wave of uncertainty. Week 2 was about adapting, evolving as conditions change. And week 3, this week, is about turning the lessons of disruption into a competitive advantage. We're now in the 3rd part of the journey. Our focus is shifting on how organizations take what they learned through crisis and translate it into long-term strength. Before we begin, our speaker, Loïc Moutault, who I'll introduce in just a minute, and I invite you to engage with us throughout the session. Feel free to share your thoughts, your questions, your reflections as we go. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll make time to answer a few of those. And if you find these conversations valuable, we'd also appreciate your support in contributing to our research. We're currently gathering perspectives on how leaders in the Arab world are navigating this moment of uncertainty, because we believe that the rest of the world can learn from us. You'll find the survey link in the chat. If you have a few minutes to complete it, it would mean the world to us. Now to today's session, Resilient and Ready, Building Organizations That Thrive. I'm really happy to welcome Loïc Moutault. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for having me.
It's been a long time coming. Let me begin by introducing you to our audience and introducing the topic, and then we'll jump right in. So Loïc is a global advisor, board member, and former CEO with over 30 years of leadership experience across FMCG, services, pet health, and platform businesses. He most recently served as global president and CEO of Mars Petcare, a division of Mars Incorporated, where he was also a member of the executive committee of the $65 billion family-owned company. In this role, he led more than 100,000 associates across 130 countries, shaping one of the world's largest and most complex pet care ecosystem. And prior to this, Loïc held several senior leadership roles, including global president of Royal Canin. He's also a former board member of IMD Business School, the European Branded Goods Association, AIM. Loïc, thank you for being here. And before we dive in, I like to start our sessions by checking in. How are you doing today?
I'm great. This is actually my first week off work, in a way. So I've just retired from Mars. So I'm enjoying the early stage of that by having a very different kind of activities. So thank you for inviting me.
Yes, after 30 years, I can imagine it's quite the new world that you get to explore. So thank you
at
for.
The moment, it feels like a bit of a grand holiday for now, but.
We'll see where the journey takes you. So let me set up the topic of today, and then I'll jump in with my first question. Over the past decades, you and I spoke a lot about this. The context in which we operate has really shifted. What was once moments of disruption have become a continuous state of uncertainty. And we operate today in environments that are defined by volatility, not isolated shocks, but ongoing volatility. We're witnessing what some people describe as a polycrisis, which is on top of the fact that it's ongoing. It's a convergence of multiple overlapping disruptions that interact and amplify one another. In recent years alone, and where I'm from and where I live is a witness to that. Global conflict zones have increased significantly, disrupting economies, supply chain, not to mention, of course, COVID a few years ago, and risks such as cyber attacks, climate events, misinformation, all of this on the rise. The result is clear. Instability is not episodic anymore, it's structural. And in that context, resilience is not simply about how an organization responds under a specific pressure, but its capacity to absorb shocks, adapt continuously, and renew over time. Some organizations fragment under pressure, but others emerge stronger, more aligned, and more capable than before. That difference comes down to how they are built, how they operate, and how they are led. This conversation between you and me, Loic, has been unfolding for years. You and I first met in the early days of the pandemic when you invited us to facilitate a session with your leadership team on resilience. And actually, many of the insights that we shared then are underpinning this entire conference this year and are following some of the same I think timeless lessons. In this conversation, we'll explore what it takes to build organizations that are resilient and ready for whatever comes their way. And I'm going to jump in with my first question if you're ready.
I am, yes. And I do remember vividly our first meeting, actually. And I met a friend, a joint friend of ours at the dog park here in Brussels, and shared with him what was my worry as a global leader. And he told me, well, I know this Lebanese lady, and when it comes to resilience, I think they could teach you a few things, and you actually did, and really helped us step up my team readiness and organization readiness. So thank you for that. And yes, it's been a long journey, and things have changed quite a lot in the last decade. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I'm glad we're finally having this conversation and we can share some of what you and your team have learned and developed with others. I set this up by talking about how leaders now face continuous crisis. You yourself have been leading through these crises as a CEO of Royal Canin and then Mars Petcare. What, from your own experience, has really changed in the nature of crisis that global leaders face?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't pretend to teach anything around resilience and disruption for people who live in the Middle East, but I can give the perspective of global business, let's put it this way. And actually, the reality is a decade ago, very few crises were actually global. Most of them were local, they were regional. You talk about product recall, natural events, earthquake, whatever. Sometimes you had a reputational issue, but they tended to be local and regional. Very few actually were global in nature. So for me, that's the big change. Now, some of those crises become genuinely global and have a global impact and impact the entirety of business. And that's a big change for large organizations, for sure. Now, the second element was the world was globalizing at the time. Geopolitically and economically. And so, a decade ago, you didn't have to worry so much, like your response, could be global in nature. Now the world is actually kind of regionalizing. Your response may not be a single one response. Even to a global crisis nature, you may have to have regional answers, in some cases, maybe country-specific ones, which is very different too when you're actually running a global business. And the last shift the last change I will recall is the nature of crisis has changed. We always had the economic cycle crisis or the industry cycle crisis. We always had the natural events, always had, reputational kind of component, like your company is being somehow stigmatized for some reason, whether you have a product recall or an issue or somebody going after you. Today, the nature of those risks are completely are way larger, wider in scope, and geopolitics makes it to the boardroom. It never really did 10 years ago. You can be a collateral damage of a health crisis, like we experienced with COVID, or cyber attack, where you're not the target. Simply you are, it's a state warfare against one state to another one, but you are being impacted as an organization. And so being the collateral damage of somebody else's issue is very, very different than being actually in the event of a crisis you kind of generated by yourself. Like if you have a product recall issue or a service problem, it's your own kind of component. But when you have really impacted by externalities at a global scale, this is a very different nature of risk and nature of the response. So yeah, I find that the context of crisis management and uncertainties management, and we were debating what is the difference between the two, is real. The environment is, and you could see it in the last year. I mean, suddenly we have, the U.S. administration raising tariffs that impacts everybody in the world and all the supply chains in the world. You have, a lot of tools that are being used now, like you can have food production, you can have duties, antitrust activities that somehow are not anymore objectively done, but they are being used for somebody else's agenda. And all of that are really impacting, I think, the nature of it. So what does it mean for business? Well, I would argue there are, when something moves from being occasional to repetitive, when the environment is kind of once in a while to a permanent volatility, you need to organize for it. So you actually need to organize for the externalities of the market forces that impact you, or what we call the non-market forces that impact you. And you need to organize for what was occasional, and it's still an event, to something that is repetitive in nature. And yes, you cannot necessarily plan for a definite crisis, but you can start to organize your organization. You can process it. You can set up processes in the business that improve your readiness and your preparedness. You can as well look at what should be the involvement of which part of your organization. So what is the role of the board versus what is the role of the management versus what is the role of the country level, regional level, or your kind of divisional leaders. And more importantly, you can plan and prepare your organization for risk and resilience. And there are tools today that you may have heard, like enterprise risk management, like business continuity management, like resiliency network, that are start to be pretty well documented. They were very new and kind of iterative 10 years ago. Now they are off the shelf, and you can use them in your organization regardless of the size.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. I think there's a lot to take out from what you said. On the one hand, for me, when I was listening to you talk, there's this idea of the many different dimensions across space and time that a leader now has to manage, right? What is global and what is local, and how are we impacted by something that is happening halfway across the globe that still somehow makes its way to us, and also being able to, think through time, the crisis tend to pull you a lot into the present, but as a leader, you also have to stay focused on the future. So on the one hand, I was thinking about the complexity of leading through that. And on the other, we are going to talk about, and I think in some ways it's a very reassuring thought when you say, we cannot predict what the next crisis is going to be, but we can predict it's going to happen for sure. And so while that's not exactly something to be thrilled about, at least it gives us a sense of certainty about, as you say, the need to develop this capability for change and for risk analysis, response, and crisis management. And when I spoke to you, and you're already starting to give us some of those answers, what was really incredible, because of course at a scale of an organization, you were overseeing more than 100,000 associates, as you guys call them. The kind of capabilities and processes that you have to put in place is simply mind-blowing. And so I did want us to spend some time, because we don't often get to look inside global organizations and learn from them. I want to spend some time on how you think about these processes and how you prepare for them. And we'll unpack the first few hours, the next few hours, and what happens after. But first of all, you've been through a number of crises. I remember you spoke to us about the cyber attacks on Royal Cana, and then COVID, and so on, and so on and so forth. And so how did each of these crises kind of inform how an organization can prepare to be ready no matter what unpredictable event occurs?
Yes, so as you mentioned, it's very hard to plan for a specific crisis, but crisis will happen, and the question is, really, how do you prepare your organization to manage them? Uncertainties are very undefined. The question is, do they matter actually? So the first level of answer is, there's a lot of noise in the world, and actually, what matters for your organization? So if I take the example of the tariffs. It was big, like mayhem and all over the news. The question is, is it really material for you or not? And in what sense it is? And that's not as trivial as we think, but that's pretty much for me the role of the leader, is to understand what really matters, and when is it time to actually mobilize your organization accordingly or not, because it can be a distraction, frankly, in some cases. The tools for me are pretty clear, is that First, you can train your teams, right? So one way is to be prepared. And why is it important? Because in my view, the first kind of 24, 48 hours of anything happening is where you can get a head start as an organization in handling the situation. And the more your teams know what to do, the less they spend time figuring it out and stressing about it. So you need to have kind of training and preparation and protocols, basically, that makes everybody not panicking. And that's the main thing, is you get a lot of leaders with a lot of ego in your organization that all wants to do the right thing. The question is, do they put their energy behind the right element? And what is really bad in times of uncertainties when it hits is that you start getting the hierarchical aspect of the organization getting in the way. Because when you're managing, the nature of crisis very different. Actually, as a CEO, you may not be the most relevant people to lead, frankly. And COVID was a very good learning from that. We realized how important was the front line. And for people who were really like me or even my boss, I remember having conversation, it was terrible for us not to have the pulse on the organization. But our job became, we need to identify everything in our protocols that gets in the way of the frontline people taking the right decision every day. So instead of wanting us to have to decide and escalate all the decision, we realized very quickly this was all around, empowering people. And then our job became simply to kind of take the stuff away from them so that they could. So one mega learning on COVID was the importance of actually the frontline teams that were taking decision every day. So just as an example, in some crisis, actually, myself, I ended up having, serving the crisis team. So I had a role defined for me because I was not the best person to run it. Somebody else was. And then you really need to put yourself as a leader at the service. You have a job to do, which is a very different one than being the CEO of the company. And that kind of mentality, you need to train it. It doesn't come naturally to people. So organizing for crisis management protocols, running crisis training in your team, identifying what is important when you have this kind of situation and you face them. For example, decided at which level the lead crisis team needs to be is absolutely critical. If you start to globalize something that is regional and local, this is not gonna go well. Now, at the same time, depending on how you structure those crisis team and you define the role they have, you may end up being super efficient because you can reallocate the resources of the organization at the right level for the right thing. And these kind of things can be trained. There are protocols for it. There are playbooks for that you can have. Now, at a more systemic level, and I'm now talking about more uncertainties and risk in a way, you can identify structurally your own vulnerabilities as an organization. Where are your dependencies in your value chain? Do you depend on a software company? Do you depend on a raw material or an ingredient? How do you know where your dependencies are in your value chain? I mean, you make product and services every day that you sell, and these things are happening. But sometimes if you really go deep, you find out that maybe one provider is actually critical for you. How do you know the vulnerability of that provider, by the way? And how does that expose you? And how do you handle, those vulnerabilities? Do you decide that they are okay? They are so important that you want to do something about it, or actually, well, it is what it is, and you just need to cope with that and maybe understand the partnership or strengthen the partnership you have with those partners a little bit more. But that's the second layer for me. So the first layer is you train your teams, you really identify the decision and the protocols, and you make sure that the mindset of the organization is that hierarchy is going to change in crisis and protocols are going to change. Second is you, in advance, identify your vulnerabilities and your risk level. And the process for that is ERM, enterprise risk management. It can be done at a local level, regional level, global level, can be done by function as well. And you decide which risk is owned or uncertainty is owned by whom. Some can be owned by the board, some can be owned by the operating unit, some can be owned by the local unit. And they are responsible for deciding in a way the response to that. And the response is you anticipate the type of risk, and therefore you decide whether you need to have a mitigation or not. So are you planning for a mitigation plan? So, for example, we in the food industry or in the drug industry today, I think with COVID, everybody realized that 80% of the drugs around the world depends on few ingredients that are made in China, and they're only made in China. Is that okay or not? Are we good with this, or do we need to change that? And if you want to change that, this is not going to happen over 6 months. This is like a year, probably a decade-long rebuild of certain industries that needs to happen so that those ingredients are available again in other parts of the world. So this kind of mitigation tend to be really kind of long-term. They require resources and investment. And so you need to balance it. You need to evaluate the cost versus benefit. Like, does it make sense? Or do you accept that you're going to lose that market if things go wrong, for example? So the decision tree of do I have this uncertainty and this potential, it can turn into a risk, and I have a dependency. Do I mitigate or not? So do I go dual sourcing, triple sourcing? Do I actually, check the provider I have of my software and I need another one, or do I move, whatever? I mean, you can decide what it is, but this is really important to do that and to evaluate that. That's for the organizational risk. Reversely, when you look at that, you can decide as well investment framework. At which condition I'm going to invest in that particular market or that product line or that type of service I want to have, and what is the level of investment I'm making based on the uncertainty. So there might be very good value to go for, but maybe the uncertainty is very high, and therefore you want to create an investment framework. In some country, you could say, so we did that in some cases, where we will invest there, but we will only invest the cash we generate in that country inside that country. We will not bring money from outside, and we will only invest in that country for things that they make in that country. We are not going to create dependency of other countries from that particular one. So this is an example where upfront you will actually manage your uncertainty level to a level that the organization can sustain. So if you lose a part of your business, well, you've made your bet. It works or it doesn't work, but it's not going to threaten the very existence of your organization. So that's maybe give you some framework around this.
So much to unpack from what you said. I mean, the first thing I want to say, our conference that we ran in October was actually about systems thinking. And listening to you speak, like, it was just really beautiful to watch you give us such a great example of being a systems thinker. On the one hand, like this understanding that the system has to be ready, and that means a lot of different things. Like, one is preparing mindsets. I really love your example where I remember when you spoke, you're like, sometimes my job is just to get pizza for the crisis team. And that's that, So I think this mindset of removing the ego out of a room, removing hierarchy, and really being focused on the outcome and the collective effort that is being put in. And then at a systems level, like, first having understood the vulnerabilities of your system ahead of time, so that when a crisis occurs, you're kind of outside of the emotions of managing the crisis. You're able to immediately decide if it's even worth you looking at or not, because it will trigger a strong vulnerability or it won't. And the third one is just identifying where in the system the problem needs to get resolved and reallocating resources and removing hurdles. I mean, that's like, textbook systems thinking being applied. You might even not ever have used those words, but it's just beautiful to have such a straightforward example to look at, and to really also see the role as a leader in this, to fix the system, not the problem, which I think is a very interesting way of kind of looking at things. And oftentimes, I also think of all the leaders we work with. Not everybody is the CEO of a global organization, and the smaller a company is, the more the leader will tend to default to fixing the crisis rather than building the system that can address the crisis. So I think that's really a very, very important lesson.
Yeah, this is always the tension. I mean, there is a great book that is very old now. I'm too old, but that has this quote of do you build the clock or do you tell the time? And there are moments where you need to tell the time. You really need to kind of direct people and really manage through this crisis. But there are moments where you need to kind of build a clock. So how resilient is your system? So it's one thing to be hit once. It's another thing to be hit repeatedly by the same kind of vulnerabilities or crisis, and it's in particular because it goes against the principle of optimizing everything in your organization. So managing uncertainties most likely will mean an extra resource investment, or, for example, you double sourcing. It means you need to build 2 factories, not 1. And so that might mean you're running with only 60% utilization for the next decade on 2 plants instead of having 1 fully utilized. And that has a cost that nobody else in the business can take. That kind of decision has to raise back at least to the CEO, maybe even to the boardroom in terms of investment level. Cyber attack, IT security. I mean, Loic and I got hit by not Petcare, which was started in Ukraine already at the time and infected thousands of companies in Europe. But we got hit really badly. Like, all of our hardware were inaccessible in 1 hour. We lost everything was blocked. Nothing worked. We could only communicate with each other even by WhatsApp. Nothing else was working. Maybe we were underinvested in IT at the time and our own cybersecurity. But on the other hand, this is a state warfare. I mean, you cannot be the only one protecting yourself against that. So, for example, post-crisis, what we did was we went to the French authorities and said, hang on a minute, we cannot take that kind of cost on. You guys need to help here. There needs to be some level of protection that is beyond what individual companies can do. At the same time, we had to obviously invest in a much higher and more secure environment. If anything, start by documenting what you're doing so that you can restore your system faster. So that was one of the learning. Is we had built, the company had grown. I mean, this might happen a lot to mid-sized companies in your area, in the Middle East, where you're growing. You don't think about these things. You keep piling up and you're opening no market, and you have a very shaky IT systems because it doesn't really matter. And then one day you find yourself that you're so vulnerable in your infrastructure that you have to take the power back actually from the individual units, so that you tell them on which platform they can work, which kind of system, and what kind of IT environment they have. And again, that has a cost. You may invest in better system that costs you more money, and an infrastructure that is a little bit less agile. So at which point in your journey you accept to be less agile just because you have too much at stake, in terms of the uncertainties you face.
I love that perspective. The other day, we were talking to Claudia Zeisberger, who's a professor of family enterprise and turnaround management and private equity. I was telling her that, one of the people that I've learned a lot of my thinking around strategy from, he says we have CapEx and OpEx, but we don't have StratEx, which is funds that we can allocate to innovation, again, in most companies. And now you've added a new category for me, which is like RiskX, because as you say, the building resilience requires deploying effort and capital that go against our instinct towards efficiency and optimization, and the ability to protect those guardrails. Whether it's to accept, as you say, lower utilization, for example, the example you gave earlier about like how much will we invest in this problem versus not, where will it come from? All of these kind of systems level decisions that are necessary if we want to both be able to, yes, grow and optimize for performance, but at the same time make sure that the next crisis doesn't kill us, which is also why I love working with companies that are more than 100 years old. I mean, Royal Cana, had been around when we met, you were the CEO there, because they have institutionalized the wisdom around this, because they've had to survive quite a few. So this idea of documentation, this idea of duplicating systems and effort becomes a little less of a debate in organizations that have survived a few of these crises. And the next thing that we want to talk about is actually that again in organizations that are more than 20 years old, let's say at least, we get to see that a lot more, which is we get to see how crises have made organizations stronger, better, more competitive. You mentioned many of the ones that you've experienced as a leader. Talk to us about in which way those crises did eventually make the organizations you were leading more competitive.
Yeah, we actually have there is a quote that we use, which is, never waste a good crisis. If you've dealt with something really big and some sort of uncertainty as well, you need to learn from it. So the first thing to do, frankly, is to build an action review. And again, as a leader, if you don't ask for that, the likelihood is people are moving on because business is kind of coming back to normal and this is getting forgotten. Actually, at Mars, the history of crisis management started with a reputational issue in the UK, and that was badly handled. And the very existence of external affairs and crisis management started out of this. So in every crisis, you have the opportunity to learn something and potentially to build up a very different capability. So, for example, Wildcanna and the cyber attack gave birth for us to business continuity management. And we had crisis management, we had enterprise risk management evaluation, but we didn't have a very robust what we call BCM. And business continuity is really looking at having a team in your organization that basically tests literally how you recover when everything goes. So it's not about it's going bad, it's about now it's bad, I need to recover. How fast do I recover? In the case of Wildcanna, the reason why we got that, because the cyber attack actually took us 6 weeks to re-automate our systems. And we didn't have enough stock in the pipeline to cover for this. So we had a real risk of losing our customers. And at some point, after the crisis, I said, okay, we need to have something that makes sure we can recover within 6 days of anything. Because that's basically the upfront pipeline we have. Beyond that, we start really falling on our knees on customer service. And so how do you test your organization for doing disaster recovery? If a site is going dark or has no energy, for example, or fire hazard or something like this. And so we built up this entire business continuity management team around, and they really test the organization for things going really bad. So it's fire, it's a tornado, it's no energy, no electricity, no systems, and what do you do and how do you do that? And by doing this, you identify, obviously, you test their system, so you as well identify vulnerabilities and you can build up. So that capability didn't exist before 2019 in Wildcanna. Now, because of that, frankly, we went much faster in our COVID response because we had the cyber attack in 2017. We created all of these protocols. All of our big sites had been tested on this. And so we moved very quickly into, okay, nobody can come to work. What's happening now? What do we do? So, for example, inside Mars, we were the first one. As soon as it hit in China and we saw it coming, because our site was hit in China, we gave portable computer to everybody so that everybody could work from home. It took us less than 24 hours because we had identified this as a system risk for us. And that's BCM. Yeah? So you have BCM is really business continuity management is a specific protocol. Other capability, frankly, will be like, of course, in system, it's very easy, cybersecurity and so on. But if I look at product recall, we have now traceability systems that we didn't have years ago. And because we got hit by a number of crises where we could not figure out where the product were, and that made the crisis much harder to manage. And so we build up a much more robust traceability system and what we call hold and release and positive release systems and protocols that may have been known in our industry, but were not necessarily used in the food industry or so common. And now we've put that in place at large scale. So the one learning is overall, each crisis helps you being more resilient to the next one, because somehow you're building something and it helps you avoiding a lot of things and or making them much smaller than what they would have been. The other big learning is what it does to your overall organization. When you operate in that kind of environment, you go back to the kind of genuine agility that any small company will be, although you're very big. And having that feeling is actually great, and making sure that people have the memory of how this can be done is actually great. So again, the cyber attack in Warakana, we found that nobody had a job because nobody had computers or working. And so people were turning up at work. They were receiving a task for the day, regardless of the hierarchy in the organization. And we had 1 or 2 outcomes to achieve every single day for the first at least 20 days of that crisis. It was beautiful to see how the organization was reforming itself every time, independent of hierarchy, budget, blah, blah, blah. Some people were we had a list of who is the most important person in this organization today, every day, broadcasted. And those people may be 3-4 levels down the organization. And this kind of create a collective, it becomes part of the making of the organization and the spirit of the organization. And so I think there are learnings for the crisis itself and the resiliency. There are learnings for your own organization in terms of team building, in terms of how your people operate with each other, and the own confidence of the organization in dealing with that kind of things. That is very, very powerful. I will say that so I talk about the kind of process learnings you may have, like traceability, for example, the capability learning that BCM or IT or cybersecurity, the team learning for me and the organizational culture learning is probably one of the most important, because as you say, this build up from strength to strength over time. So companies that are really, really old have had like hundreds, thousands of those. And therefore, it kind of built an inner muscle in the organization. Now, I have to say at Mars tends to be a good company in crisis. And we joke sometimes that when we do trainings with other companies, our teams end up having figured out what to do and how to organize themselves. The other ones are still talking about who is leading the response. And that's because of this. Like the mentality, the spirit is when you are in this situation, egos have to go out of the way. It's not the time to kind of try to posture yourself. Everybody needs to be at stake for the business. And that's an organizational learning, in my view. Now, you have other learnings, in my view, that are the depth of the scope you look at. So the capabilities, we tend to look at our own business. The real question is, again, your dependencies, what is in your entire value chain and what is the depth of that? So for example, our level of supplier auditing or qualification has completely changed because of crisis, in the way or because of events we had to face. How you select your partners and how deep you go in their own process, for example, and what do you ask them to do and to be in response is very different. Now, again, that has a cost because it means you may not take the cheaper, but you're going to take the most resilient partner. But the license of saying, big companies cannot say, it's my supplier's fault what happened. You cannot afford to say that. So you have to have a level of diligence that is very, very different. So that's an example of capability that we built on inbound testing of raw material, vendor insurance protocols, and this kind of things that has totally changed for the food industry that we were in at the time, and are very strong capabilities that we built up. Does it make sense?
Thank you. It makes absolute sense. Actually, I was texting my team in the background. We have a model that we use to help leaders think through the system of their organization. I was like, Loic is essentially unpacking the omni-channel organization for us. And what I mean by that is that what I want to, resonate with is that you've really, and that's kind of even how you organize what you're talking to us about, is like, we look at how this impacts our process, our structure, our capabilities. And then you went on to talk about your culture, your people, the skill sets that they develop. And it's really about being able to see this crisis and how it strengthens the bones of the organization in that sense across all of these various dimensions. I also really love the symbolic, mention, or the mythology, right? Because as you say, like, oh, we at Mars, we're very good at this. And it's part of your mythology. And oftentimes that helps people to align and rally, because confidence is not knowing the answer, but it's knowing that you will find it. And so it builds organizational confidence, which is really beautiful as well. And so I really love that you tapped into that. One of the kind of the forms of alignment, so you've spoken to us a lot about how that creates energy. One of the ones that I really admired in you as a leader was actually, because when I met you, it was to do an exercise with your leadership team. And I would come back from any interaction and I'd say, oh man, I've never seen a CEO be so intentional about how they form this team and how they bring people together, and how they align them. And I think that's, one of the most impressive things for me, because I think a leadership team of organization at any size is a big lever. And if you get that right, you can get a lot of things right. So what enables a leadership team to operate as one in moments of crisis? What did you build in peacetime that was extremely useful in crisis time when it comes to your leadership team?
This has been one of my management and leadership journey at Mars. I got privileged to work for this company that invests a lot in people. I was not born a leader. I became a leader through the company and the kind of coaching, mentoring, training that we had, and some of them were exceptional. And the one learning I have is every job I took, I went faster in investing in a team and more ruthlessly at the very start. I don't come to a business with my own agenda. I come to an assignment. I try to do what we call fact-finding and, of course, an in-depth diagnostic of the situation. Based on that situation, I try to assemble the best team I can. I don't come with my own people. So I keep the one that I believe are great. And if I need to bring other type of talent and people, I believe in diversity as well, obviously, and diverse of profile and competency and background. And then I assemble that team and I co-create the agenda with them. So first we go into our own protocols and what we are and who we are, the team. And sometimes this is very tough. I mean, I remember actually when I took over Wildcan, I was coming after a revered leader in the organization. He was, my predecessor was loved. And so it was probably one of the most difficult jobs is when you succeed somebody that is really, really iconic in the organization, and it's very intimidating. And the first team session we did was an absolute disaster, to the point that the team wanted to fire the coach, the facilitator, because it went really bad. And then we started to look at what happened, and we realized that team never stuck with a coach more than once for more than one session. So there was a systemic rejection of coaching in the team. And so we did something really interesting, that we stuck with the coach and we put another one on it to help look at that issue itself, right? So why was the coach rejecting systematically? And so, but I spent the first 4 meetings, I believe, not talking about strategy or business performance, but actually talking about team protocols while doing some work together, but really what we wanted to do. Went back to the history of the organization and appropriating all of that history collectively so that we had a common understanding of the history that matters for us at this point in time. And then you start building on that with the way you want to behave, who you want to be as a team, and then team protocol and so on. All of that to say is, it is something you do in peacetime because you have the time. I mean, it's much harder to do when you're in a turnaround situation and you need to go much faster. But I tend to invest a lot in that. So four meetings of 3 days, this is 12 days for a leadership team at this level. It's huge investment. But what you do when you do that is, obviously, you create the glue, you co-own the agenda, everybody knows the agenda. And of course, at some point, yes, we all have big egos in the room, but it becomes about the business. And this is a mindset everybody needs to have. You can only fight for your own turf at some point. At the moment when you enter the room, you need to have a hat of being a representative of that business, regardless of your function or regional perimeter or business perimeter. That's my recipe. I mean, sometimes does work very well. Sometimes it has been much harder, but I've always invested a lot in that. And funny enough, I mean, at the end of the day, it speaks as well. You look at the incentive structure. If you incentivize people on individual performance, well, what are they going to do? If you make them, on a collective incentive, and if if you have the incentives working for your agenda, it's always easier. I mean, I know it's a bit cynical to say that, but it tends to work. And so this is really important. And then the last thing I would say is, so building team and spirit, co-owning the agenda, aligning your incentive structure to this agenda and collectiveness. And the last one is trivial, but I think the CEO has a key role in that, is you need to make friends before you need them. You don't call for help people for the first time. You need to be talking to your customers, you need to be talking to your suppliers, you need to be talking to internal, external stakeholders that are around your business. They need to know them, you need to know them, they need to know you. Not only for that, but when you do that, so in the case of Royal Canin, for 6 weeks, we could not invoice, we could not pay anyone. If our suppliers had decided that you don't pay, we don't deliver, we would not have recovered that business. We burned hundreds of millions of cash during that time, and we could not pay our suppliers, and we could hardly pay our associates. So you have to have created something that enables these people to say, we know you, we've worked with you for 10 years, you help us in the past, we've helped you, we are helping you now. I remember as well, for the recovery, I don't know how many people we mobilized inside Mars, like the entire IT department stopped working on anything else but our recovery. But similarly, at IBM and Microsoft that we were using at key suppliers, we had massive resources being poured into this. And they didn't ask who's going to pay to start with. Okay, they mobilized first and then created an environment for that. So make friends before you need it. And you as a CEO, being able to rally the troops at the right time is a big signal for your organization as well. Okay, that is a big act of confidence. So anyway, that's maybe the starter for 10 on this area that I could experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love you reminding us that kindness always pays off. And I think that's always an important lesson. And the power of this human connection, of spending time together. When I work with the CEOs for the first time, and I tell them, by the way, as a reminder, one of your jobs is to manage this team. Because actually most CEOs don't allocate that much time to bringing their teams together and being with them. They always fall off their chair, So now I have you on record. I'm just going to send this clip to people and say, if this guy could find 12, this is on top of, I'm sure, your regular cadence and your meetings, but 12 days a year to do nothing but be in full presence with their leadership team, I'm sure you can find 2 days a year,
The big lesson, frankly, for me is like, there's no point being the smarter in the world. You recruit top people, the best you think you can recruit for the job. You need to empower them in a way or another. But in order to empower them, they need to understand the framework they work against, and the kind of team they are. When they own that agenda, most likely they will actually surprise you and over-deliver whatever they've been asked to do, because they appropriated themselves. They understand it at a deep level. It's not something they are told to do. It's something that they know they want to do. And when you create that magic, it doesn't always happen. Frankly, I've not always been successful, but when you do that, the business develops and thrives in ways that even surprise your own expectation.
Thank you for that reminder. One last question. We will spend some time on how you, because in the middle of all of these things that you've described, there's also a person and a leader, and I want to spend some time on that. But transitioning us, we spoke about how important it is to build the strength of the team, of the organization, of your relationship with your stakeholders, both in and out of the organization. These are all, as you said earlier, like sometimes obviously a lot easier to do in peacetime, and then you can reap the benefit in wartime or in crisis time. One thing that you told me that was also an interesting realization that I want to wrap us up on before we talk about how you lead yourself through all of this is the moment of being able to exit crisis mode. Like, how do you know that we're now going back to peacetime in the context of these continuous crises that are happening around us?
Yes, so the mobilization early in a crisis, managing one of the risks you're facing, or when the risk has materialized as a crisis, is one thing, and is critical. And only you can do as a CEO. Like you give the tone and you explain, what structure, what decision, what protocol you're going to follow, and so on and so on. But it's almost as important to actually know when are we out of because when you operate under that regime, it's an exceptional regime. It doesn't follow the normal way of operating of the business, the normal protocols, and so on. And you cannot operate forever like this. So you need to know when to blow the whistle and say, you may not be totally back to normal, but you need to sense the moment that, okay, it's time that we go back to the normal way, normal structure, normal way of operating, and we start remobilizing there. Because what happened is, for example, some markets may be less impacted than others. They may already be back to normal. Others are still in a kind of middle of the acute crisis, but somehow, if your biggest market is already back, they should. I mean, you need to be more demanding about what they're going to do. They need to be back full steam ahead on what they can deliver. And so you need to sense that, and you need almost to create a kind of an exit of crisis protocol, and then an after, what we call that aftercare. You move into an aftercare regime that is a little bit of an in-between, where it's back to normal plus an aftercare for the part of the business or the part of the processes that are not fully resolved yet. And you need to have an artifact of re-engagement and mobilization into that. And it's as well, in my view, the job of the leader to call that and remobilize, re-engage, and redefine post-crisis what does success look like from now on. For example, if you have a yearly calendar, you were on plan when the crisis hit. You're now below plan. What are the new targets for everybody? How do you manage them? What do you go for? It's your job to define that in a way and find a way to remobilize the troops in that context. And so, during the cyber attack, we were ahead of plan by a few points, and then we were below after that. And again, I use the same trick. I told people we will do plan, and everybody was like, he's crazy. This doesn't make any sense. But I changed completely the incentive systems, because some units were so far behind that I knew they would give up. And we kind of elevated everybody to the highest of their local plan or our plan, the global plan. And so everyone had an interest to actually get back and do the best they could do in that context. But the other thing that happens is sometimes you're very surprised by people. And the finance team, for example, had done on their own, without me asking anything, they documented everything during the crisis. And so we could go to our business interruption insurance, actually claim some of the recovery cost because it was a ransomware. And I will tell you, I didn't engineer that. I didn't design for it. And that's why I'm saying, when people know and understand, they will surprise you. And so the CFO came back and has everything ready, put the claim on, which actually enabled not to cover the loss of top line, but the recovery costs of all of the IT infrastructure. And that year we made our plan, which was not short of a miracle, frankly. And when I called for this, I thought I was crazy, but everybody thought I was crazy, including myself. But I think if I had not done it, we would have fallen much below that. And so it's just an example. And sometimes I don't want to say that it's always heroic or whatever, but defining what do you think is success in the post-crisis now for your organization is critical to remobilize them. And you need to be credible in doing that. So you need to give them things to believe that this is, yes, we're truly going for that. And this is what you want as a leader.
What an incredible way of looking at this. Thank you for that. So through all of this, managing many crises, the board, the stakeholders, the crisis response, the process, the recovery, the leadership team, the list goes on, obviously. And you as a leader are at the center of it. And again, you don't have to be a CEO to ask yourself this question. I wanted to spend some time, because anyone who's leading through this moment may understand everything they have to do, but it's important that they can lead themselves through it. So how do you manage your own energy, Loïc, in order to be able to sit in the middle of all of the storm and still be able to set a vision and lead people through it?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned that from one of my mentors. Actually, he's always said that one of the role of the leader is to import stress and export confidence in the organization and calm. So you need to put yourself in in a position where you play that role. And by the way, the interesting component with that is very often people will come to you and ask what to do, and actually they know, but they don't dare. So my first answer very often is, well, what will you do? And then they talk. So it's a trap. Like, they want your opinion, but in fact, they actually know. They want reassurance. They want permission. So you deal with a lot of the tension just by throwing it back at people. And then maybe you say, oh, good idea. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about that? But then it's less work for you, actually, because suddenly you put the energy back into them and you empower them. And that's, honestly, it deals with 95% of the issues. And therefore, one way of distressing is to re-empower your organization, even when they are paralyzed, simply by unlocking them, because actually the expert, or somehow they know what to do. And we should not assume that they don't. And very often when they ask, they don't actually ask. What they ask is a permission to do it and go for it. The second thing is, you may be rock solid in the office and in front of everybody, but that doesn't mean you don't cry when you're in your car going home because the pressure is so high, and that's fine. Okay, it's okay. And finding somebody you can talk to, a peer or someone you can download with, or your doubts, your questions, whether it's your boss, probably it would be ideal actually that you have such a relationship. But if it's not, a colleague or friend that you can share your anxiety or your doubt or just download. I would not advise to do that at home because it's not always very good to bring your problems back at home. But having that in your network is useful, and having people to talk to that have gone that, whether it's your mentor or your coach, or it relieves the stress. You need to manage your own energy. If you don't have good energy, don't turn up, frankly. You may as well say, I'm going to come 2 hours late today. I know we're in the middle of the crisis, but frankly, you need to go running. You need to do something for yourself. Do something for yourself, because when you show up, you need to show up, and you need to show up well for the organization. Not a superhero, but receptive, present, able to listen, and actually import that stress and re-export that confidence. And if you're not in that state, I would actually recommend not to show up, but do something that will bring you back in that state, whatever it is for you. Some people do yoga, some people need to go running, and some people need to go boxing, I don't know. But it is important to do that. The other thing I would say is, you need a moment in a day where you take perspective up. You are in the middle of it, and then at the moment in a day, in all this uncertainty, you need to go back, take perspective, and make sense of what's going on. There is a lot of noise in uncertainties, crisis, like news are coming all the way. Not everything matters. Not everything is important. A lot of things are distraction, and maybe even are excuses for people not to do things or not to go the extra mile. And you need to cut through this, because your job is to channel the energy behind what matters. And so you can make sense of it. You can say, well, this is what's all happening outside. This is what we can focus on. That we don't control. It's not in our hands. There's nothing we can do about that. We know it's there. Let's focus on the thing we can control and we can influence. And these are the things, and channel the energy of people behind that, and acknowledge progress all the time. A lot of people, I see a lot of leaders that are always kind of say, well, this is great, but what about that? What about that? What about that? When the organization is in hypertension, they need to know that they are progressing somehow. Success brings success, progress brings progress. When people feel they're winning at it, then suddenly momentum accelerate, confidence accelerate, and you start getting a better response. If you keep moaning about what doesn't work, I tend to think that you kill the atmosphere, and people will not have this, will not display the same energy in the organization. And I think this is really really important to do that. So make sense of this world. And what really matters for your organization. It's even helpful for yourself, because this is what will create relativity to the issue. the perspective you may have, say, yeah, okay, we might lose this business, but at the end I have these other 2 or 3 businesses there and can always rebuild on that. And it's trivial to say, but what I'm leading to is whatever happens, you need to recompute your plan. You had objectives, you had things you wanted to achieve in a year. I mean, you would not be a leader or a founder of a company if you didn't have things in mind. When events like this are happening, if you stick to that and you get grumpy because it stops you to do it, this is not useful. So somehow you need to take a perspective, make sense of the world, and recompute, what is achievable now, what is desirable now, because that will help you actually, I think, recover and learn, and maybe actually create a business opportunity for you. I can tell you that, I mean, we didn't talk about that, but in some cases, this might actually open an opportunity because one of your competitors may go down during that time, or one market may suddenly open up because somebody cannot continue to operate there because of whatever, geopolitical tension, or I don't know what. Are you able to size this or not? So having this perspective on things can be very powerful, and it's a good source of energy because it puts you in a positive motion personally. So.
Yes, absolutely. I really resonate with that. And, my team jokes that when I've spent too much time in the present, I become physically anxious. So I have to spend time again in the future. And just what you're saying, this like recomputing, zooming out, deciding what matters, focusing on what you can control, but still having a view towards the horizon. I definitely agree is something that is extremely, extremely helpful. I'm going to take one. I mean, there are questions from the audience. We covered so much ground. I'm just going to take one more because I really love this kind of question. And then we'll go to our lightning round. But this question from Zainab says, what did you have to let go of as a leader to be able to operate effectively at this level?
The defining moment, I think, for me was actually I was a general manager at some point in my career, obviously, a couple of times. And once I felt really badly led. Like I was in a very tough spot, and I had the feeling the leadership above me was not helping me at all. And I had to figure out what it was. So they were not helping me. And on the other hand, I was trying to, so I had basically bosses and the boss of the boss, and they were not agreeing on what would be what would success look like. And I kept wanting to fix that. And at some point, I really blew up. And one of my coach told me, but Loic, you keep looking at their position, you don't look at the interest. So you need to understand that. But the most important thing is, what do you want to do? And the problem is I had my team almost frozen because I was positioning myself as a victim of above me. And so one of the things I had to let go was, you have the bosses that you have, okay? And some of them are great, and they are great in certain things, and they're not great in other things. But at least for me, I had to let go of the fact that I thought that the higher you are, the better you are. It's not always true. And so no matter what, I had to kind of own the answer and propose that so that my team could be free and thrive again. What was very important is when I went to Asia after that, and I became a regional president of general manager, this informed the kind of leadership I wanted to give to my GMs. And I learned that there was no point for me to know what needed to be done. I needed them to understand what I saw. They needed to appropriate that for themselves. And if they did, they will be so much more powerful in doing it than me just going there and say, you should do that or not do that. So I really had to, what I call build the clock. I became a systemic thinker, I think, at that time, frankly, where my thinking was, how do I get the team or this individual to understand what I see? Not through my words, but experience it himself so that he actually acts on that in the right response. And I can tell you, this liberated these people. This was magical to watch. People we thought that were almost on a firing list 6 months before, ending up being fabulous leaders because somehow we remove them from the shackles of the corporate structure. And all what I was asking them to do is to define the agenda for their unit, but do that in a way that was not that where they appropriated it, the kind of direction that we somehow need to take as a business, rather than listening to all the stakeholders that were asking them to do something. And this has completely changed my thinking. So the consequence of that is it goes slower. Initially in your head, it goes slower than just going and being the smartest guy in a room and telling people what to do. And so what I had to let go, frankly, is having this patience to believe in that to some extent, that maybe my short-term performance will be impacted. And I know that my boss still today tells me sometimes I need to stop being a marathonian and more of a sprinter, because I tend to default to that mode now, more than the intervention mode, if you want, in the business. So I had to let go about being the smart ass in a room.
I love that. And a great example of taking a personal crisis and turning it into a system capability again, which is really beautiful. And of course, we always have to hold tension between, as you say, the interventionist short-term outcome and the long-term system. And I think, you're starting into a new phase of your life, but the systems you leave behind is your legacy. So I think you've left something really powerful behind, and we'll see what you do next. Loic, we could keep this going, honestly, for another hour. I have a million questions, but I do have to bring us to a close. And we always ask our speakers the same 4 questions at the end of our session. So if you're ready, I'll start you with the first one.
Okay.
Well, you spoke to us earlier about the importance for each leader to manage their energy, and gave us a lot of examples of what others might find grounding. What personally keeps you grounded?
The classic answer is your family keeps you running very quickly, frankly. At least I have a spouse that is very active, has a lot of things, and not a lot of sympathy for my own business problems, and so that's very helpful. I think, to do that. And personally, I've always protected personal time. I know I shouldn't say that on public audiences, but I work very hard during the week, but you need to have a real good reason to call me in the weekend. And I will default that to, and I always notice I have my best ideas or best thought when I go running somewhere, or I visit a museum. I connect the dots between elements I see in my private life, the book I read, and business. And so these usually are my best moment of inspiration. They are not actually when I'm in the business and doing things. So I tend to protect some of that really a lot, and that's very powerful for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I really resonate with that. I think our other worlds, whatever they may be, from our families to culture to books to stepping just out of our reality, is a really great source of inspiration, which actually leads me to my next question, which is what helps you to stay limitless? So even in the midst of crisis or difficulty, to continue holding possibility, imagination, and curiosity within yourself?
So again, I read a book early on, which you all know, most likely Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of the Highly Effective Person. And you open the book and the chapter titles tells all about it, so you don't need to read all the book. But one of them is start with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. And so, by the way, I'm not saying that I've always been limitless. Frankly, there are moments in your career and life where you're not limitless, and you think sometimes things are a bit insurmountable. But on the other hand, I've always had this feeling, probably due to family circumstances, that there was no fatality in business. You could always turn the situation around, and it depends on the kind of courage, price, what you were willing to give up. But the fatality in business, in my view, doesn't really exist. But having this end in mind, like when you're taking an assignment or you're taking an organization, what are your dreams for it? So one of the exercises I did with my teams when I do that is we write the cover of the Financial Times, cover page of the Financial Times about or around our business in 10 years from now. Just like get people do that, for example, and do it for yourself. So what do you dream of? And I can tell you in Petcare, we believe so much that having a pet is good for society that we ended up writing a cover one day saying that we should be reimbursed by the social securities for keeping people out of hospital. So we should be marketing the benefit of pets in society so hardly that it would be recognized by institutions. We wrote this 10 years ago. Right? And so these kind of things where you're like completely out and that keeps you with the possibilities that the business can deliver. Now, along the way, obviously, most of your plans you achieve in much longer time frame that you envisage and so on. But thinking big and dreaming about what the possibilities of your business, in a worst case scenario, you achieve 50% of a dream. I mean, wow.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you for that. Coming back to today, of course, you're a global leader, but, you've led teams and organizations in this part of the world. What is the leadership quality from the Arab world that you think the rest of the world can learn from?
Oh, I don't pretend to know the region very well. I operated a little bit in a region, of course. And I mean, when you look at, notwithstanding what's happening right now, but when you look at the transformation of the Middle East, I was one of the one who helped the first investment of Mars in Egypt and Saudi, and I was in Jebel Ali many times because we had our first factory there in snacking. I think what for me is I lived that a little bit when I was in Asia. One of the strengths you have is you believe in the future. You're not stuck to kind of, I think in some cases, old countries, as we call them, sometimes they love their past more than they love their future. And you are in a world that moves quickly and fast and embrace technology and the new and sometimes building crazy things and that we can all have an opinion on, but the fact that you're there is very powerful, and I kind of really love that. Obviously, resilience is kind of in your blood in a way. You live through difficult times, crisis, things are being taken away regularly, and things like that. So the ability to adapt and being reborn or not take no for an answer. Mobilize resources in a very powerful way is very important. What I find interesting, though, is, and I think it's a characteristic is the same with some of the countries in Asia. There is an ability to do very long-term planning in this part of the world, and to when I look at some of the institutional investment behind Emirates this didn't happen overnight, okay? And so there is a real ability to provide long-term planning and long-term direction, which actually enables to mobilize energy and businesses over a time horizon. Because what business needs this, it needs a stability of the investment thesis. If you have that you can invest a lot, because you will have a return. If the investment thesis keep changing all the time, and you don't understand how the environment is going to shape, it's very hard to plan investment. But I think in this part of the world, for good or bad, but there is an ability, in particular, I guess in the GCC, but we see it now in Saudi, and we see it in Turkey. That there is some long-term planning being done. Which was not the case, I think, necessarily 20, 30 years ago. It was a bit more random, but now there is this, which enables to mobilize a very different level of economic resiliency and even economic investment and capability development, which is very powerful.
Thank you for that. We do have a museum of the future, so we are definitely really I personally, as a leader being here, I always say that if I had built my company in France, for example, where I used to live before, it would not be the same company. So I really feel that energy myself. And then my last question for you, Loïc, is based on everything we discussed today in terms of how you prepare your organization to come out stronger after every crisis. What are the top 3 things that you would advise leaders to do right now in today's circumstances?
Well, the first thing I would say is it's not because you can't plan it that you can't prepare for it. Okay, so you can prepare for a volatile world. You can prepare your organization for that, and putting your mind to this is kind of once in a while is interesting. Like looking at risk, vulnerabilities, anticipation of uncertainties. It might actually inform your investment choices, your resources, the type of capability you build in the organization. It will give you as a leader a very different lens on your business. Now, you can't do that every day, but you can take a few days in a year or a week to do this and plan for that. The second is, as I said, the biggest thing is know your value chain end to end and really understand the strength of that value chain, and your value chain is only as strong as its weakest point. So where is it? And can you actually systemically de-risk it in a way? Is it transport? And then Hormuz is a problem. Is it, this is irrelevant. It's a lot of noise, but it's irrelevant for you. Where are the kind of vulnerabilities or weak points in the value chain? How can you mitigate and strengthen it is really important. And the last one, as frankly, is all this notion around what kind of relationship do you build in your team and around yourself, right? That will make you stronger in the face of uncertainties. Building those relationships ahead of time will be very, very useful in the time of dealing with uncertainties, risk, and ultimately crisis. And I think it's very easy to not invest in that. Again, in the Stephen Covey book, there is this framework of urgent, important, not urgent, not important. Most people spend their time in urgent. The most successful organization and people spend their time in the important boxes, whether this is urgent or not. But they definitely protect time for important, non-urgent, because this is what will make your team, your organization thriving over time.
Thank you for that. A reminder that we can be prepared, that we should know our vulnerabilities, and that investing in both relationships and what is important is going to enable us for the future. What a great summary. Thank you again, Loïc, so much for this. It's been a long time coming, but it was definitely worth the wait. I've had this conversation with you preparing for this, and I still learned a lot today. So I can only imagine what it was like for our audience members. We're really very grateful for your generosity and your openness in sharing all these lessons.
Thank you, Marilyn. It was my pleasure. I'm really happy I could honor this finally.
Thank you. It was beautiful. And thank you to everyone who attended today or who might be listening to this later. We'll be sharing the recording of the session on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on our website as a podcast, so you cannot escape it. If you'd like to re-listen to it or think someone in your network might benefit from it, please do pass it along. And if you want to thank us today, we'd love for you to participate in our Leading in the Arab World research. We'll drop the link in the chat. It takes 5 minutes. We're really hoping to extract some wisdom from what is happening today so that the rest of the world can learn from us. We have 2 more sessions coming up before we wrap up the conference. And of course, this afternoon's session is with one of my mentors and the person who always helps me to wrap up the conference, which is Prof. José Santos. He's an affiliated professor of practice in global management at INSEAD. And we're going to be talking about the difference between leading and governing at the edge of uncertainty. So what's the difference in the role of a board in directing an organization versus managers in leading it? And in that conversation, we're going to really look into the practical tools, guardrails, and methods that leaders and governors can use to enable effective action in the context of uncertainty. You don't want to miss it. It's today at 4 p.m. UAE time. Thank you all again for being with us, and we hope to see you soon.